on the old side.
You may be seated.
I'm sorry, I know you put it on the floor.
You may be seated.
Sir, you indicated that you photographed the entire body, is that right?
Yes.
The outer portion and then autopsy findings as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Sir, I'm going to show you what's been admitted as People's Exhibit Number 2. What's contained here?
This is the lower back portion of the body. It's identified with the marker as 81180003. And on the buttock area, there is a burn area. And then on the lower feet, on both feet, on the soles of the feet, there is a burn injury.
Sir, these burn injuries, were you able to make a determination about the burn injuries that you can see in these photographs, if they were accidental or inflicted?
The pattern of the burn injuries is indicative of an inflicted burn injury.
And can you explain what you mean when you say inflicted as opposed to accidental?
Inflicted by another person.
Meaning what? What happened?
Typically, the inflicted burns that we see on children are what we call symmetrical, meaning that on both sides they're the same kind of injury. The burn injuries are deep, meaning that they're the body part has been in the hot surface for a time that causes a deep burn injury, and that they are patterned, that they're symmetrical in deep areas. Also, on the palms and the feet tend to be relatively protected against heat injury because the skin is thicker in that area. And here you can see that there is extensive thermal burns to the feet area.
Sir, was the skin, would you expect to find skin attached with these burns?
As you can see on the photograph, the type of this burn injury, which I would call a second-degree burn, is where the top surface of the skin actually lifts off from the body surface. Typically, it blisters and then it erodes off.
And does this appear that, were you able to offer an opinion as to whether this appears that the skin had eroded off or been removed in some way?
It's a typical second-degree burn.
What's that mean for the judges of the facts?
As I described earlier, it means that the skin blisters off and then it releases off the top surface and then is eroded off the body.
Okay.
Do you think that this skin was actually had reached a point where it actually eroded off, or someone else had done something to take the skin?
Well, like a blister, I mean, it can erode off by itself, or if another person touches it, it can dislodge it.
And are you able to tell by looking whether what happened to these burns?
No, I would just call them second-degree burns.
All right. Now, we hear often second-degree burn, third-degree burn, fourth-degree burn. The first question I want to ask you is, would a second-degree burn be any more or less painful to somebody than a fourth-degree burn?
Well, that's calling for speculation.
Well, do you know that of your medical training? Is that something that
I'm not going to allow it. I think that's too speculative.
Is a second-degree burn a painful injury, sir?
No, in my opinion, it would be yes.
And what's the difference between a second-degree burn and a fourth-degree, third-degree burn?
A first-degree burn is basically a sunburn where the skin is intact. A second-degree burn, that, as we mentioned, the top surface of the skin blisters off and erodes off. A third-degree burn is where the burn actually burns through the second layer of the skin, which is the dermis, and it can leave a scar. And then a fourth-degree burn is where the burn actually goes through the entire skin surface, destroying the appendages, and requires a skin grafting.
And sir, you indicated that was significant to you in deciding that these burns were inflicted, that they were symmetrical. Is that correct?
Correct.
What does that mean to you, and why is it significant to you as a medical examiner?
Well, in an accidental type burn, you would expect that there would be movement in different areas, and that an individual would try to extricate or leave the area. There may be burns on the back of the hand, or an elbow, or a knee, or if somebody were to pull some hot water onto them, you would have a splash type pattern. But in an inflicted injury, you've got the symmetrical pattern where the actual body part has been held in a particular area for a sustained period of time in order to receive that burn.
And are you able to estimate, based on your experience, about how long somebody would have had to have been held in hot water to sustain this kind of burn?
It would depend upon the temperature of the water.
Could you sustain this kind of burn in anything other than hot water?
Sure, in other types of hot liquid surfaces.
Other than something hot, though?
There are such things as what we call caustic burns, which are burns that are caused by chemical injuries. They don't appear to be the same on the outside view of them. They tend to be a little different. So you can get burns with other caustic substances.
Is there any reason, are you able to offer an opinion whether this burn was caused by being held in hot water or some other kind of burn?
This burn was what I would call a scald burn, intentionally inflicted scald burn.
Thank you. Are you able to tell in your examination about how long before Gabrielle Barrett died that these burns were inflicted on her?
In looking at the actual burns under the microscope, there wasn't an inflammatory reaction, or there wasn't the kind of healing reactions we saw. So I would say that they would be consistent with having been caused, a few hours before her death.
Could it have been up to 24 hours before her death, sir?
It could have been.
What about beyond the 24-hour?
We start to tend to see inflammatory reactions and scabbing and that type of thing caused after that. So I would say it's probably most likely within 24 hours.
Within 24 hours of death, is that correct?
Roughly, yes.
All right, thank you. The burns that you saw in people's number 2 were not the only burns on her body, is that right?
Correct.
And were you, based on the pattern of the burns that you saw on her body at autopsy, were you able to offer an opinion as to whether or not, as to how the position of the body when the burns were inflicted?
I have an opinion.
And what would that opinion be, sir?
Your Honor, can I demonstrate?
You may, I'd be honored.
There were other burn injuries that were present, and the burn injuries were on the elbows. Again, these are symmetrical, so the right and left elbows, and then the right and left knee, and down onto what I would call the tibial area on the shin portion of the body. And then, as was seen in the photographs, on the tips of the toes, kind of sparing the heel area. And then referring to the previous photograph, there are 2 rather symmetrical burn areas on the buttock area, and then sparing of the rest of the body. So it's my opinion that there were 2 separate dunk injuries.
When you say dunk?
I mean that the child was dunked into hot water.
And would she have had to be held in hot water or just dunked?
Well, I would say that the one of the injuries was a dunking of the buttocks only, where there was a burn injury, symmetrical burn injuries to the buttocks, and then that the child was probably in a flexed position, and then dunked into the area, so just the elbows, the knees and the shins, and the tips of the toes were in the water, but sparing the rest of the body.
So the first one was the butt, the second one was what?
was the child, most likely, the areas were the elbows, the knees, and the shins, and then the tips of the
Wait a minute.
toes.
So that, would that be a position where your elbows are down, are down, and you're on your knees, as opposed to your hands and knees?
And you're in a flex position, correct?
And flex meaning with buttocks out, is that right?
Correct,
And abdomen out of the water, correct?
correct.
And the shins?
That would fit that pattern,
Okay.
The shins were in the water, correct, sir?
yes.
And the buttocks, you indicated you believed that the baby was what?
I believe that was a separate injury, a separate incident.
Could it have occurred one right after the other, as opposed to separate in time?
Well, they were separate in time, but it could have been quickly in repetition, yes.
But let me ask this question. Were the burns on the body the same type, in that one was not like older, like maybe a week ago?
Correct, they were contemporaneous or roughly the same age, yes,
So the burns were contemporaneous?
correct.
Okay. Although we have different locations, one on the buttocks, a dunking, and one potentially on the elbow and knees, but they both were, but they were contemporaneous, the burns were contemporaneous. But they
Right.
just were different episodes potentially.
Correct.
Okay, very good.
Sir,
And you said the last one was the toes?
And the toes, I believe, would fit with the injury, with the dunking from the front, exposing the elbows and the shins.
So the elbows, knees, and shins and toes was all one dunking?
That's my opinion, Your
That's
Honor.
your, I mean, that's your opinion, I'm
Yes.
sorry. And what I say, that's his opinion. You can say, Doc, you don't know, he wasn't there. You don't have to regard his opinion. You are the judges of the facts. You can give it whatever weight you choose. Do you understand that? All right, very good. So when the court was asking questions, I'm not presupposing that this is accurate. This is in his medical opinion. Is that correct, Doc?
Yes.
Okay, that don't mean that he was there because he wasn't, okay? Go ahead.
at this time, I'm going to show people's exhibit number 3, and just ask you what does that depict, sir?
This is the back portion of the child, again showing the burn injuries on the buttocks, and then the burn injuries on the elbows that we discussed earlier. Also, over the back area are what we would call blunt trauma or bruises and scrapes. And these are patterned injuries in that there's a kind of a linear scrape. It kind of tells us it was caused by possibly an edge, either striking an edge or being struck by something. And then we can see that there's different colorations of the bruises to the back, meaning that they're of a different age. Some of them are older and some of them are more recent.
But is there any indication to you that these are inflicted injuries, sir?
Yes,
And why would that be, sir?
because it's on our back.
And is a pattern injury to
What does
you?
that mean?
What does a pattern injury mean
A
again?
patterned injury is an injury where the appearance of the injury gives us an idea of what was the implement that may have caused that.
And so by looking at these injuries, you can see that something was used to inflict these injuries. Is that right?
Correct. I would also add that over the right side of the buttock, which is on the side closest to the floor, there is a patterned bruise to that right buttock and thigh.
And are you able to offer an opinion about what caused that pattern bruise, sir?
I have an opinion.
And what is that opinion?
It's my opinion that that is a patterned injury consistent with a slap hand impact.
And you can see that because of the lines that we can see in that photograph, sir?
Correct.
And those are bruises.
Yes.
I'm going to show you now a photo of the hair of Gabrielle Barrett at autopsy. Can you tell us what you noticed about the hair?
The hair was matted.
What does matted mean?
It stuck together. It was unwashed, and there were lice noted in the hair itself. There was a laceration, a dried laceration on the top of the head that had a dried white ointment on it. And that's the photograph of there is actually a small cut to the skin, and this is dried, and then there's some ointment over the top. And then in the left back portion of the head, and I'm pointing to that area myself in the left back of the head, there was an area where the hair was absent, but there was fragments of hair that was still present.
Sir, you in your report.
Wait a minute, let's back up. What was significant about that?
It was my opinion, Your Honor, that the hair had been pulled out of the head in that area, and that when I did further investigation under the skin, there was hemorrhage underneath that area. So I believe I gave that the term as a traumatic alopecia, or pulling of the hair out of that area.
And that's
Which one are we at about? With the doctor?
quite a bit, I'd say. Maybe an hour,
Maybe an hour?
maybe.
I want us to let's take a 10-minute recess, okay? All rise for the jury. I want you to go outside for a little bit, okay? Just go outside. All right? I'll see you back in 15 minutes, okay? 15 minutes.
Hair, but in traumatic alopecia, I wanted to indicate that the hair was forcefully pulled from the area while the child was still alive, because there was hemorrhage noted underneath the scalp in that area.
And I'm going to show you, well, we did 5, is that right? All right. I'm going to skip to publishing for the jury number 7, which would be the left side of the head. What do you see in this photo, sir, that would be significant to you?
Well, this is a photograph of the child placed face down, and on the left side of the cheek there is what I would describe as a purple-brown bruise or contusion over the lateral cheek, the side of the cheek, and we can also see some of the bruising on the back of the left shoulder.
And sir, would the bruising on the left side of the cheek, are you able to offer an opinion as to how that would have occurred?
That's a blunt force injury, and
That's on the left side of the cheek?
correct.
Okay.
That's a blunt force injury, and the coloration of it would indicate that it was at least 3 to 5 days old.
Thank you. I'm going to show you now I'm going to skip number 10, and I'll publish to the jury number 11.
Let me just ask this question. You know this is probably maybe silly to you, but you indicated when you said blunt force injury on the left side of the cheek, and I believe that there was a buttock, that you believe that it came from the hand. How would a hand hit cause that kind of injury?
On the side of the right buttock area, there was an open, I would be my opinion that the pattern was indicative of an open hand print blow with an open hand. The bruise to the left side of the cheek would be typically from a blunt object such as a fist or other kind of implement.
But that's your medical opinion.
Correct. In cases, for example, where individuals fall, those falling injuries typically occur over areas in the midline and over bony areas over the top of the scalp. For example, we'd expect that somebody, if they fell, they'd have an injury to the nose, the cheek, the nose, the chin, and the forehead area.
And so those would be indicative maybe of somebody falling.
Correct.
Why?
It's when individuals fall, they tend to fall in injury, bony prominences, elbows, chins, and the front portion of their foreheads.
Okay, when they fall. Okay,
Correct.
great. Go ahead, Counsel.
I'm going to also publish for the jury the exhibit number 12, which would be, I believe, depicts an injury behind the left ear. Is that correct, Doctor?
Yes, it's typically an abrasion.
Is that what that is, an abrasion?
Yes.
What's an abrasion mean?
Just where the top portion of the skin has been pulled off. It's a scratch area.
Doctor, are you able to tell if this was inflicted or something else?
I couldn't tell specifically that it was inflicted.
I'm going to show you an injury to the right cheek, which is people's, I'm going to publish number 13. What do you see here?
Again, this is a pattern of bruising to the right cheek area. It has different coloration. It's brownish and purple would indicate that it was probably around the 3 to 5 days old.
Is there any kind of accident or fall that it could account for bruising on both sides of somebody's face or head?
In a child like this, I don't believe so.
Is that part of the reason that you have an opinion? Does that go into your opinion that these were inflicted injuries, sir?
Correct, and that this type of pattern is, not seen in cases where there's accidental falls or other types of injuries.
And rather, is this a typical pattern for what you've already told us was one of her diagnoses, battered child syndrome?
It would be, yes.
Sir, I'm going to publish for you what is described as a photo of the right side of the mouth. What are you seeing here, sir?
You can see on the bottom towards the floor is a tube, and that's basically her breathing tube that was placed in her mouth with resuscitation. And then on the lower lip, on the right and left side of the lower lip, as well as the upper lip areas, you can see there's abrasions or cuts in the skin. And these kind of correspond to the remaining teeth in the lower portion of the mouth. You can see that the teeth to the upper jaw area are black. Those are decayed and dying or dead teeth. The forensic odontologist that I examined.
And tell the judges of the facts what that is. What type of doctor?
That is a dentist who works in the area of forensic science, and that I consulted with him and we examined the body, and he determined that
No.
Did you make this?
You can't just rephrase. I'm sorry. You can't
Did
say
you,
what you thought.
Right.
did you follow his observations as he was making them?
Yes, Your Honor, I inspected it with the consultant, and we determined that there were 14 of the 20 teeth that were present, 14 of them were necrotic and decayed.
Sir, you also had indicated...
Okay, but let me ask this question to you too. Now, you don't know when you say neurotic, what is it?
Necrotic.
Necrotic.
Right.
Necrotic and decayed. Can that be a result of maybe children drinking a lot of juice, not properly brushing their teeth?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Sir, you indicated that there was indentation marks in the upper lip, correct?
The upper and lower lips, correct.
And those corresponded with the teeth, is that correct?
Correct.
And when you say that, does that mean the teeth actually impacted the under part of her lip, is that right?
That would be my opinion, yes.
And did that lead you to an opinion as to what contributed to her death?
Within the context of other findings, yes.
And how did these indentations in the lip and the teeth lead you to make some findings about her, what contributed to her death?
Well, along with the impressions on her lips, there were small pinpoint hemorrhages in the eyes, and there was aspirated or vomitus that was deposited well within the lungs. And taking that into consideration, it was my opinion that this is a suffocation with a compression or a hand placed over the lips with compression onto the teeth, causing an asphyxial death.
And how does I understand what you're saying, that the hand would have been forcefully placed, is that correct? Enough that the teeth caused that impact you saw, is that correct?
Correct.
How does that relate to these pinpoint hemorrhages in the eyes, if you could tell us, please?
Well, with the increased pressure of fighting for air, it causes increased pressure that causes the small blood vessels in the eyes to rupture.
And is that a typical or finding for a forensic scientist or a forensic pathologist when they see suffocation deaths, sir?
It's one of the things we look for, yes.
And in this case, you did see that, is that right?
I did.
And the vomit in the lungs, how would that relate to this asphyxiation, please?
Well, it just indicate that the child, in the course of dying, was inhaling gastric-type contents into the lungs.
Sir, I want you to assume, for hypothetical purposes, that there's been testimony during this trial that at the time that a EMS person arrived, there was still some atypical heartbeat that they were able to detect. Would that be consistent or inconsistent with a finding of an asphyxial death?
It could be consistent with an asphyxial death within that proximity. And what I mean is, you can basically die from asphyxia or lack of oxygen to your brain, and your heart can still have a fairly faint heartbeat for, a few minutes.
Could it continue for up to a half an hour or more?
It's possible, yes.
And would an attempt at CPR do anything to prolong that faint heartbeat?
It would stimulate the heart, and the medications and the resuscitative procedures would sustain that.
For a period of time?
Possibly longer, yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you the bottom lip, which I'm publishing as Exhibit 18. Does that help? Does that further demonstrate what you were talking about?
Yes, it shows the abrasions and lacerations of the skin of the lower lip.
And that is a finding that would be consistent with an asphyxial death. Is that correct, sir?
A suffocating type death, yes.
Suffocating death.
Correct.
And suffocation meaning the hand or object over the mouth. Is that right?
The mouth and nose, yes.
Thank you. I'm going to show you next 19, an injury to the left shoulder. Right. Do you see?
Yes.
What do you see in that photo, sir?
I see a contusion or a bruise to the left shoulder. That looks fairly recent.
So the other bruises that you had pointed out to us, that would be an 11 and 12, photos, exhibits 11 and 12, you indicated those were 3 to 5 days old. Is that
So-
right, sir?
Those would be older based on coloration, correct?
And this would be a more recent bruise. Is that
That would be my
correct?
opinion, yes.
Now, which ones were 3 to 5 days old?
The ones on the cheeks, Your Honor.
Okay.
Are you able to give us an estimate?
So let me ask this question. Did you review the police reports?
Yes.
Okay, when was the child, when was she, Gabby, the young
Gabby.
Gabby, when was she brought to the,
Emergency room. Is that what you mean?
the morgue?
She was in the emergency
Oh,
room.
the emergency room?
She was there on the first, roughly around, I think, 12:30 or so in the
No, what day
afternoon.
was that?
I think it was Monday,
No, I'm saying what?
the 1st, January 1st.
January 1st. So it's in your medical opinion, it's my opinion, that the cheek bruising occurred 3 to 5 days before the 1st. Is that correct?
That'd be my opinion, yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
This bruising that we're observing on the right shoulder, sir, can you give us a medical opinion as to the range of time prior to death that this would have been inflicted?
I would say a couple of days or less
Why?
because of the appearance of the injury.
What do you mean?
If I could refer to my records.
Please, anytime, feel free to do that. Just don't testify for me.
I don't see, Your Honor, where I took a actual section of this skin. I did take multiple sections of other skin areas that appeared similar to this, and I saw no evidence of inflammation or white blood cells that would have indicated a repair type process. And we would typically see that within 1 to 2 days.
Which means what?
I think this is a rather recent injury, probably around the area of less than 24 hours or so.
And that was due to what? What was the basis?
Microscopic and visual appearance.
No, I mean, what you said, what, some about some repair on?
Oh, yeah, there's lack of inflammation in the area.
So, sir, the injuries that we described, that you described to us as being approximately 3 to 5 days old, would those have been injuries that had begun the repair, the injuries of the face?
Yes,
And this, on the other hand, had not begun to repair, and it did not show that inflammation that is consistent with the body beginning to repair, and therefore you're able to estimate it was 1 to 2 days. Is that correct?
correct.
Could it have been the same day as death?
It could have been.
I'm going to now publish photo number 22, which is a photo of the back. These injuries on the back, you have already described to us that they're patterned injuries, correct, sir?
Correct.
And are you able to estimate if all of these injuries occurred at the same time, or these are different injuries of different dates, sir?
It would be my opinion there are different injuries at different dates.
And what is the basis of that medical opinion, sir?
The coloration of the injuries. Some of them are pink, and other ones towards the middle of the back are more brownish in color.
And sir,
And brown means repair,
Yes,
and pink means current.
correct.
some of these injuries seem to have yellow marking in the middle of them. What is that? What are we seeing there?
I'm not sure what you're,
Are those, is that an abrasion? Look at the very bottom, is that an abrasion
yes,
at the bottom?
Yes.
Are these all the same sort of injuries, or some bruising and some abrasions?
Correct. Some are bruises and some are abrasions.
That's what I was trying to ask. And can you just distinguish for our jurors what the difference is between a bruise and an abrasion, please?
A bruise is where the skin is intact and there's crushing of the tissues underneath the skin and there's hemorrhage into that area. An abrasion is where the top surface of the skin has been removed with some kind of a friction, either an implement or, for example, a scratch where the top portion of the skin is actually removed and then it dries and it gives you that appearance.
Do you have a medical opinion, sir, as to whether these injuries that we observed on the back part of Gabby, on the back of Gabby or Gabrielle Barrett, whether these are inflicted injuries?
In my opinion, they're inflicted injuries.
All of them.
Yes.
What?
Now, let's go over this one more time. Pattern injuries mean what?
Pattern injuries is an injury that may give us that has a particular appearance that may give us an idea of what had caused the injury. For example, like a tire mark or a knife mark or with a scratch, particular scratch.
And you said that you believe that the pattern injury was indicative of what?
Well, I don't know what this implement or
You're just saying it's a pattern injury.
Right, I'm just saying.
And then you said an inflicted injury means one that was not an accident.
Correct,
Not an accident.
correct.
Okay.
I'm going to publish for the jurors a photo of the lower back on the left side, number 24. Is this consistent with is this an abrasion that you described to us earlier?
This is still a component of the pattern that we saw earlier. You might be referring to a bruise on the left hip.
And is there, are you seeing a bruise on the left hip?
Not in this photo, no.
All right. I'm going to publish for the jurors photo number 25 and then 26, which would depict the left arm of Gabrielle Barrett. What do you see, sir, on the left, on this photo of the left arm?
There's an abrasion on the left arm area. Then there's a pattern that's seen on the left chest there, the linear portion, that's from resuscitation. That mark is from resuscitation.
And then you see the elbow as well, is that right, sir? Part of
Yeah.
it.
Yes,
And that would be the burn or thermal injury that you've already described to us, is that right?
correct.
Are you able to tell us whether these abrasions and bruises on the left, on the left arm are inflicted or accidental injuries or consistent with either?
I wouldn't have an opinion on that case.
All right. I'm going to show you published photos number 27 and 28. This would be a photos of the right, and then 28, this is 27 is the right forearm, and 28 is the left forearm. Sir, does this photo indicate to you the thermal burns that you described as symmetrical?
Yes,
And consistent with, as you described it, a flexed arm position when she was, using your words, dunked for this into the hot liquid.
correct.
And number 28, is that the same thing on the other side?
Yes.
I'm going to show you by publishing number 30. What do you see in this photo, sir?
You can see that there's thermal burn injuries to the arms, but there's sparing of the hands.
And why is that significant to you, sir?
Well, it just indicates that there's a pattern of flexion of the extremities and that area is in the surface of the water and the hand is basically out of the water.
And is that anything that would be consistent with an accidental? Would you expect there to be sparing of a hand if somebody accidentally fell in water?
I don't think if it was accidental, it would depend upon, again, how hot the water was, how long it was there, etc. And I mentioned that hands that are burned would indicate that the hand had been there for, physically there for a prolonged period of time, relatively in the hot area. We see that burning on the foot, but we don't see it on the hands.
And that is because the hand, when as you opine, the intentional burning of the forearms, her hands would have infixed or flexed and out of the water. Is that correct, sir?
Best fits the pattern of the burn injuries that we're seeing, yes.
And would that be consistent with, as you described, the inflicted injury?
That would be my opinion.
Thank you. I'm going to show you 32 for publication. That would be the right hand. Is that the same?
I believe it was the same one we saw before.
30 and 32, the other ones. So,
They're both spared.
and that's consistent with what you've already described to us as an inflicted injury, correct, sir?
Correct.
33. It's a photo of the right hip and thigh. What are you observing here, sir?
Again, over the buttock area, we can see the thermal burn injury. There's contusions or bruising to the lateral or the side of the knee area. And then on the thigh, you can see that a bruise pattern that looks like a handprint.
And where do you see that on the thigh, sir?
On the upper thigh.
Right by the buttocks, sir?
Yeah,
And
yes.
that would be consistent with a hand print, sir?
That would be my opinion, yes.
Sir, is that consistent with being slapped hard enough to leave a bruise?
Yes.
And, are you able to give offer an opinion as to how long before death that injury was inflicted?
It appeared to be fairly recent, I would say within a day or two.
Skipping to number 36, inner right thigh. What are you seeing here, sir?
Again, there are bruises on the inner portion of the thigh.
Do you know how long before death those would have occurred?
They look recent.
And do you have an opinion as to whether or not those were inflicted injuries?
I couldn't be definitive just because of the position of those, but it's possible that they were, yes.
What about the next one, 37, inner left thigh?
Yes, there is a contusion there, which appears to be a rather recent contusion.
38, which is going to be the back of the right leg and knee. What are you observing here, sir?
Those show the linear scratches, or what we call linear abrasions. They appear to be recent and non-scabbed.
And what about above that, sir? In the actual fold of the knee?
I think there's some scattered bruising.
The back of the left knee, sir. That which would be publishing number 39.
Again, there are the linear scratches that are present over the back of the leg.
Number 40 and 41, which would be the left calf. What are you observing here?
You can see the both legs in the lateral projection, and they depict the superficial abrasions in the lower legs over what we call the Achilles tendon area and the lateral or on the side of the leg.
Are you able to tell us, sir, how recent those injuries would have been?
They appear to be recent and non-scabbed.
I'm going to take you, sir, now and publish photographs 55, begin with 55, which would be a picture of the face, the eyes. What did you just, what, if any, can you tell us anything about what you saw on the face and eye of Gabrielle Barrett?
In the eyes, and I can't see it in this projection, but there was a pinpoint hemorrhages, what we call petechial hemorrhages.
And is that what you already described to us would be consistent with a suffocation death?
Yes,
And is that what you were attempting to photograph, even though it's not coming off quite clearly here?
correct.
What about the right eye, sir? Can you see it better there?
No, I can't see it. It might be in another projection.
But that was something you were able to actually see during autopsy, is that correct, sir?
Correct, and it was described and documented.
Thank you. I'm gonna publish for the jury what is People's Exhibit number 42. What do you see in here?
Again, this is the scalding injuries over the knees and the top of the feet with sparing of the heel areas.
Sir, as part of the normal routine for a autopsy, do you do what is known as a toxicology report?
Yes.
And was there anything significant in the toxicology findings with regard to the child, Gabrielle Barrett?
If I could refer to the record.
Sure.
There was the presence of caffeine and amphetamine. The amphetamine was what we call at a therapeutic level.
What does amphetamine mean, sir?
Amphetamine is a stimulant drug. It's typically found in medications like Ritalin and atenolol and other stimulant-type drugs.
But it's a prescribed medicine?
Correct. It could be, and it also could be an illicit drug also, Your Honor.
Okay, but it's not what you can just go to go to CVS and get.
Correct. It would be a prescription.
And it's what?
And that's amphetamine, but it's in like Ritalin and atenolol.
The level of it.
Oh, the level was therapeutic. It was at a normal level where you would expect someone to be when they're getting a prescription, in a normal prescription concentration.
And so, and would it, are you familiar with a drug named Adderall?
Correct.
What is that?
Adderall is a stimulant drug that's, given to individuals to increase their stimulation and concentration abilities.
Is this amphetamine that you found in her blood consistent with what the finding would be if the person had ingested Adderall?
Yes.
And
Now, what does Adderall do to stimulate what?
It's a stimulant for individuals who have trouble concentration. I'm sorry, I'm blanking, Your Honor.
Like, would,
Behavioral problems at
Okay,
school, that type thing.
Okay, and so what does the stimulant do to the brain?
It helps the individual concentrate better and focus on their projects.
if that would be if it's prescribed, is that right?
Correct.
When you talk about a therapeutic level, are you talking about as opposed to some other kind of level, as a doctor?
As opposed to too much or too little.
All right, so, but do you have any information whether Adderall would have been prescribed to this 4.5-year-old child?
Objection,
It's the
speculation.
same.
No, I'm not asking if it
Well,
was,
let me
I'm
ask you,
asking if
do
he
you
has
know?
any information.
Do you have any information regarding that?
I don't, Your Honor.
Okay, very good.
Do you know if this,
So let's back up a little bit. Let's back up. So you say that it's therapeutic, right? It's a stimulant, right?
Correct.
And that's for someone who is prescribed it to help them to focus better.
Correct.
do you know?
Wait a minute, I'm not done.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. So if you're ingesting it, and say for instance that I'm prescribed it, is it Adderall something you can buy at CVS?
No. I mean, you can buy it with the prescription, yes.
I'm talking about, can you just go to the counter and just
No.
buy it?
No.
Like Tylenol?
No.
Okay, so you have to get a prescription.
Correct.
And the person and the type of symptoms that it's normally treated for are people who have what?
Behavioral problems, hyperactivity, concentration issues.
So once they ingest the Adderall, it makes them focus better, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Go ahead.
Sir, do you know if Adderall, even at a therapeutic dose, affects somebody's ability to sleep or their appetite in any way?
Well, amphetamine, which is a component of the drug, is typically used in dietary, prescription dietary aids that inhibit appetite and cause activity that would burn calories.
Also, if people take Adderall, it makes them skinny?
It could, yes.
Oh, okay. So do they prescribe it for that?
Yes. Well, I mean, amphetamine is prescribed for that, yes.
And spell amphetamine.
AMPHETAMINE.
Okay. Now, okay.
What about sleeping?
Excuse me, ma'am, madam. So some drugs have another use. Is that correct? Okay, give this an example. Adderall is maybe prescribed for somebody who has some behavior issues. Is that correct?
Correct.
But another use may be that it may, a person may lose weight. Is that correct?
Correct. It's also used for breathing, to improve breathing in some people with asthma problems.
Like, what's that drug? It's another drug that does the same thing.
I'm not sure, Your Honor.
Off the record. Like the sex drug that men take. That's for something else, right?
Is the court talking about Viagra?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
That,
Viagra was used for something else, but it also has a side that can be used for something else. Is that correct?
correct. Viagra was initially prescribed for high blood pressure, but the side effects were desirable side effects to make another medication, another
Okay.
use.
So Adderall has a side effect of like that too. Is that correct?
It has, it's amphetamine, it's made of
I
amphetamine.
mean, it make you lose weight, right?
Sure, correct.
Okay, so another reason a person may ingest it or take it is because they want the benefit of losing weight.
Correct.
Okay, go ahead. That's
Sir.
all I want to know.
Okay. Sir, I guess I didn't hear, but maybe I missed it, if it has any effect, the amphetamine, on your ability to sleep.
on sleep?
It could, yes.
Because it's like, you said it's a stimulant drug.
Correct. People who abuse amphetamines and methamphetamines are basically up all night, and they're also used as study aids for individuals that want to, focus and study.
You indicated that a child with behavioral problems, an inability to focus or concentrate, might benefit from Adderall. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you have any information or know as a medical doctor whether Adderall is ever prescribed to a 4.5-year-old child?
I don't know.
If somebody is given an epinephrine during resuscitation efforts, would that come out as amphetamine on a drug screen?
No, it should come out as, well, if it's just a screen, it may come out as an amphetamine-like drug, but if it was tested to identify, it would come out as a ephedrine.
And was it tested to distinguish from the epinephrine and the?
I don't recall that test, no.
Okay. So is it possible that this testing for amphetamine was actually revealing epinephrine or not?
Not in my opinion, no.
Thank you. Is epinephrine a common drug used for resuscitation?
Yes.
And in your opinion, it would not be distinguished in this drug screen as amphetamine?
From my understanding, it would not cross-react with amphetamine.
Thank you very much. Sir, you indicated that it is your opinion that the cause of the death of Gabrielle Barrett was due to multiple traumatic injuries, correct?
Correct.
And it is also your opinion, as you indicated, that asphyxia could have been a final assault. Is that correct?
It was one of those, correct.
All right. And sir, did you have an opinion as to whether or not there was more than one assault to her mouth or her mouth area?
Actually, there would have been more than one. What hasn't been described is a laceration to the frenulum, the upper frenulum.
What's that?
The frenulum is that piece of skin that attaches your lip to your gums. It's more prominent in children. And in this case, the frenulum had been previously torn
How do you know?
from blunt force trauma, because it would be present on the photograph that was taken, Your Honor. And I removed that skin at the time of the autopsy and looked at it under the microscope, and it had a lot of infection in it, so that would indicate that it had occurred a number of days before that, the final death. So the laceration...
So it's like the little piece of, whatever.
Skin, yeah.
Skin that you do when you take your tongue and
Right.
it's to your gum.
Yeah, there's one on the top and one on the bottom.
That's gone.
Yeah, right, correct.
They were torn.
Right. Well, the one on the top was torn, and we can depict it in a photograph.
Yeah, and that would be, I'm going to publish number 15.
How would that be torn
It's
in your medical?
It's typically the result of a blunt trauma or a blow to that area where there is movement of the tissues under force, and it can tear. And as I mentioned, I examined it under the microscope, and it was there was inflammation present.
And that inflammation indicated to you this would have occurred prior to the final assaults that we see the the teeth marks, is that right?
Correct, a few days before,
A
yes.
few days before death, sir?
Right.
The teeth marks that you indicated you saw in the upper lip, would those when would those have occurred in your opinion?
Those were recent injuries within a few hours of death.
And, sir, when we're talking about a child with multiple injuries over multiple days, is there an alternative theory as to what could have finally brought on her death?
Well, individuals that are under extremist circumstances with multiple bruises, burns, and other areas can go into what we call shock, where the heart and circulatory system get infected and they just stop working. That's one comment on individuals who have, severe burns and injuries will have septic shock.
And are you able to tell us whether Gabrielle Barrett was suffering from some sort of shock syndrome?
It would certainly be one of the medical differentials when you'd see the individual. Burns cause a loss of a lot of fluids and electrolytes, and burns such as these could be indicative of shock or result in shock.
Sir, do you have a medical opinion as to whether Gabrielle Barrett would have been in pain in the day of her death and the days prior to her death?
I have an
Suffering
opinion.
from pain. Can you tell us your opinion?
It would be my opinion that
Your medical opinion or
yes.
your personal opinion?
my medical opinion.
Okay.
Would be my opinion that the dental decay in the mouth area would be a painful injury, and that the infliction of the bruises and abrasions over time would be painful when inflicted.
And what about the burns?
The burns are certainly very painful injuries and would have been extremely painful at the time.
So would it be your opinion that over the days prior to her death, the child suffered from pain?
That's an answer.
I would say over the hours before.
And what about when the other injuries were actually inflicted on her?
When the other injuries were inflicted, those would cause pain.
Anything further?
Sir, is there anything that
Well, no, that's not no question.
Sir, what is the reason that you arrived at a manner of death as homicide in this case?
The injuries that are present on the body and noted are all inflicted injuries caused by another person.
And all of those injuries contributed to?
The injuries contributed, the burn injuries specifically, and the asphyxia contributed to her death.
And that is why you arrived at the conclusion that her death was a homicide. Is that correct, sir?
Correct.
Hold on, can I have 1 second?
Yeah.
Your Honor, I do not have any further questions for Dr. Jentzen at this time. Thank you.
Let's take a lunch break. We can do it real quick, okay? How many witnesses do you have after this, Jim?
I believe only one.
Very good. I'll see you back promptly at 2 o'clock. All rise for the jury. We're going a little late. We're going to finish it. Not going to, when you're ready to go to sleep. Court's in recess.